Hello everybody and welcome back to our ranking of the bosses in the Legend of Zelda series. Moving forward from the experimental sequel in Zelda II, the first and only installment in the franchise on the Super Nintendo dropped like a megaton hammer slam as the true successor to the original. The game embodies everything a sequel could hope to be, an innovative advancement on the original in every way, shape, and form while maintaining the spirit of its predecessor. The graphics received a bump from the new hardware with a beautiful pixel style that still holds up nearly 3 decades later. The soundtrack is full of lasting staples for the franchise. The gameplay returned to the top-down format, but added depth with advanced swordplay, numerous creative items, and astronomically improved dungeon design. The story is far more present and gripping than ever before, and this game is a downright blast to play from the moment you take up the sword until you slay the final boss. There's no doubt that this is a phenomenal game, but with all these evolutions in the Zelda formula, how do the bosses fare? Without further ado, let's get started with my ranking of the Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past bosses from worst to best. Number 12, Mothula. What is it with wing bugs being absolute dog shit in every game I cover on this channel? I swear it's enough to tempt me into making the top 10 worst flying bug bosses in games. But for today, let's settle for roasting this wing pest in the pits of Skull Woods. Frankly, the overall design of this fight has little to do with the moth itself. In fact, all the moth does is flutter around firing 3 simultaneous magic shots at regular intervals. That's a weak pattern of attack that is more reminiscent of its predecessors in Zelda 1, such as Aqua Mentis. The problem here is instead of trying to shake up that triple arc shot formula, they decided to toss it in this trap-stuffed hellscape. You've got a floor moving in multiple directions, spike traps bordering a puny room to keep you boxed in, and they'll periodically fly at you from random directions. So the danger dial is cranked up to 11, but it has very little to do with Mothula itself. Instead, you're in a race to fry the insect before the stage exterminates you. Considering the boss only takes a handful of strikes to slay, you would think it wouldn't be an issue. And you'd be right if the level didn't negate the damage it takes the majority of the time. Anytime you slash Mothula and knock it into the outer barrier, the game registers it taking damage from both your sword and the arena. The boss is designed to negate any damage from bumping into the sides on its own. So if you hit it into the arena, it will negate the damage you've done as well, which is perfect considering this overgrown blight takes up a quarter of the arena. You can mitigate this by using the dungeon's item, the Fire Rod, but its magic is limited unless you found the half magic upgrade already. Adding all of this up, you got an arena against you on 2 fronts. It wants to kill you and negate the damage you do to the boss. The boss itself has dull design that is overcompensated for by the aforementioned murderous stage, and as a result, this boss lacks any of the creativity we'll see throughout the rest of this list. Number 11, Moldorm. In speaking about creativity, Moldorm nails it pretty well. In the top-down format, evasion is all about calculated movement across the screen. This caterpillar has speed that far exceeds yours, and its only method of attack is ramming into you. That could be a downside, but the arena is large enough that the majority of the contact with the boss will be on your terms. Your reason for making moves on it is thanks to its weak point, the tail. Slash it 5 times and Moldorm gets a big speed boost, and then you have to nail it 1 more time with that added challenge for victory. Moldorm twists, turns, and darts around fast enough to make hitting its tail a challenge, especially for new players. If that's all Moldorm was, we'd be seeing it far higher on this list. For some reason though, the developers felt the need to amplify the difficulty by adding in an environmental hazard. When Moldorm bumps into you, you go flying, which is unfortunate because they decided to make the arena a platform surrounded by 1 giant chasm. It's honestly easier to get bounced off the edge than it is to hit the boss. Even though this is tedious and frustrating, I could excuse this if they decided to make it a situation where getting bumped off takes an extra heart, but you jump straight back into the fight. I'd still dislike the design, but it would be better than the reality, which is that when you get bumped off, you go back to square one. That's right, get bumped off once, and no matter how far you are into the fight, you have to start it all over again. They do leave you quite a few pots to replenish your hearts, but I still assert that it would be better to continue the fight with 1 HP bar for you versus 1 HP bar for the boss than have a bunch of do-overs until you can execute it perfectly. Instead of focusing on the boss, you're left focused almost solely on not succumbing to gravity. It's even harder to excuse this decision when you consider that Manhandla already did a similar thing in the series, and they thought the way to innovate was by adding this disappointing wrinkle? For forcing an unnecessary and irritating environmental hazard upon us, this inventive fight gets bogged down far lower on the list than it should have been. Number 10, Blind the Thief.
It's a trap! Trap!
Yeah, I'll give it credit for that. Blind's bait of following you as a maid and then turning out to be the dungeon boss is a devilish twist. When you consider the previous bosses though, I'm sure by now you've picked up on my hatred for environmental hazards that feel unnecessary like with Moldorm, or the mask mediocre mechanics like with Mothula. Well, Blind has no environmental hazard, technically. What it does have is an amplified bullet hell style battle that may as well be one. I think it's fair to say by the time you get to the meat of this fight that Blind is his own environmental hazard. Just like with Mothula, this fight is practically a race to the finish because you'll be dealing with so so many things flying your way that you're forced to end it as fast as possible. Like Mothula's similarities to Aquamentus and Moldorum's similarity to Manhandla, Blind is an advanced form of Gleeok. He takes 9 hits, and for every 3 that you land, a head flies off and continues to attack you autonomously. By the time you got 2 heads firing at you and Blind racing around the arena, the idea of proper placement flies out the window and you're left racing to slash Blind wildly before being roasted. In reality, I do like the theory behind Blind, I just feel that the exponential danger encourages a reckless playstyle that isn't really so much fun as it is a chore. Number 9, Cold Stare. Continuing on in our ranking of the worst to best environmental hazards in A Link to the Past, we come to Cold Stare. Cold Stare is one step up from Blind in that the bullet hell-esque nature is down greatly here. In fact, calling it a bullet hell would be a stretch. Really, the only danger here is an icicle that regularly drops where you're standing. This requires you to stay on the move. Add in that when the icicle lands, it breaks into 4 shards that pop out like a plus sign or the letter X. It keeps you on your toes in a way that's much needed here. That's because Cold Stare himself serves only as another piece of the setting. At first, he's encased in ice and blocks off part of the arena. You have to balance between the falling ice and melting him out with a fire rod or the Bombos medallion. Once that's done, he splits into 3 and floats around. Chase down each piece while dodging the icicles and slash them down to win. It's nice that you can use the different tools in your arsenal to make this easier, but it feels underwhelming to have to chase down pieces that amount to glorified arena threats. Definitely better than everything else so far, but it's a far cry from being one of the better bosses in the game. Number 8, Vitreous. Finally, a boss that cuts off the arena for a sensible and respectable reason. Vitreous is a grotesque collection of eyeballs that has 3 effective sections: the left group of small eyes, the right group of small eyes, and the big ball itself. You can handle this in a number of ways, but there are 2 main strategies. The first is far higher risk, but will end the fight quickly. Run up into the poison, causing your health to plummet, but you can kill the eyes lightning fast with good timing. Of course, if you miss or stay in the poison too long, you'll be KO'd. The far easier method is to use magic from afar or wait for the eyes to come at you and swing away. Once all the small eyes are down, you fire a bunch of arrows to poke the giant eye for victory. I like all this fine, and I think the poison is an effective and fair deterrent to stop you from slashing your way to victory with too much ease, but the downside of Vitreous is that it's still pretty easy and dull to slash away at the eyes from afar. Just let them come at you slowly and keep swinging your sword to prevent them from ever making contact. You'll slowly slay them all, with the only bit of danger being a lightning attack from Vitreous. It's definitely a step in the right direction compared to the lower peers, but the boss is trivialized too much with certain strategies to be a serious contender for a higher spot on the list. Number 7, Argus. Keeping with the bizarre eyeball theme, we come to Argus, the first boss to make huge use of its respective dungeon item. This monster will float around the arena and do a few AoE style moves while your task is plucking all of its babies away and slaughtering them to get to Big Mama. Its difficulty is a bit of a letdown because it doesn't do much in the way of stopping you from doing this. Once you've rid it of its protective layer of children, it's a simple matter of striking it a few times before it's dead. It will try to body slam you and dart around the arena, but it's nothing overly exciting when you've already faced the speed of Moldorm. Argus isn't a bad boss, but he certainly isn't a world beater either. I would say that he's solidly average when you consider his mediocre combat prowess, but neat design that at least bothers to incorporate the dungeon item. Number 6, Aghanim. Aghanim serves as a prototype for the first phase of Ganondorf in Ocarina of Time, which is appropriate since it's a mask that Ganon wears to fool the king into letting him steal the maidens and usher in the Dark World. Story significance definitely plays a role in Aghanim's placement, but his fight isn't too bad either. It's simple, sure, but it works well and it's good fun. Aghanim has a set cycle of 5 moves where he employs 3 attacks. For the first part, he will always fire a large energy ball that you can deflect back with your sword at him. This is your method of doing damage, and it will take 6 landed deflections to win. For the second, third, and fourth moves, the boss will teleport around and fire off either a large energy ball or tiny blue balls. Their name is appropriate because getting them is effectively blue balls. There's nothing to do other than dodge or slash through this attack, as it can't be deflected back at him. After 4 moves, he will always go up to the top and unleash his final attack, which is firing lightning down. The mixture of attacks in the second to fourth part keep you on your toes nicely, but the problem is that once you understand the lack of randomness outside of that, Aghanim becomes all too simple. I used to think that his lightning was random, but knowing that it comes as a scripted attack after every 5 moves makes it impossible to get hit unless you're being careless. Still, I'm guilty of loving boss design that involves reflecting attacks back, and the blue balls add enough of an interesting wrinkle to keep you guessing at least a little bit. That's enough to land Aghanim just inside the top half of the list. Number 5, Trinex. Trinex is a boss that looks a lot more menacing than he ends up being, just like Aghanim. In fact, I would consider Trinex to be somewhat of a puzzle fight. Not that it's a hard puzzle to figure out. Use the fire rod on the blue head and the ice rod on the red head. A few slashes is enough to cut off the heads, leaving you with Trinex darting around with a weak core. Hit him a few more times for the win. If it sounds simple, it's because it is. What makes Trinex a threat is how hard he hits. And in respect to his design, the fire and ice theme is neat, with them both having corresponding attacks to give you trouble. You have to keep an eye on the center rock head too to keep yourself safe from its attacks. I think that like Aghanim, the problem is that once you know what to do, Trinex becomes a bit of a cakewalk, but in fairness, a lot of Zelda bosses are that way due to their puzzle nature. At least he offers some kind of challenge unlike some past bosses. Goma. This boss packs a punch to offer you a proper endgame challenge even if you know exactly what you're doing. Based on that evolution and solid overall mechanics, I give the nod to Trinex just inside the top 5. Number 4, Armos Knights. One of the better initial bosses I've ranked in recent memory, the Armos Knights strike a perfect balance of giving a fun advantage to experienced players that can manipulate their scripted movement and provide challenge for new players. Not to mention they actually find a way to make a 6-on-1 battle work. To their slight discredit, the reason it works is because they don't actively attack you, but instead harm you by bumping into you like a lot of the worst bosses on this list. What I find different and clever here is that while their movement is scripted, it's almost treated like their attacks, including things like bouncing around in a circle, expanding and constricting, and marching around from top to bottom. It forces you to attack at the right times to succeed and know all the movements in their arsenal. They also reward you for adept use of the dungeon item, the bow, because it does twice the damage of your sword. If you know what you're doing, you can strike them down with arrows in a rhythm that lasts little more than 10 seconds. But if you don't know how to manage their movement in your own, you'll quickly be overwhelmed. It's learning a pattern and overcoming it, which is a big part of what great bosses are all about. I also love that it has a proper second phase with the final knight healing to full and chasing you aggressively. It's a nice twist after the passive dance in the first phase, but it keeps it from being unfair since it's one-on-one. It's a great battle that is rewarding to learn to overcome and still plenty enjoyable once you know the rhythm. Number 3, Landmolus. This game really has a hard-on for caterpillar and moth-like bosses. The honor of the best of the bugs goes to Landmolus. The second boss in the game has a basic concept that's depth lies in how challenging it can be to manage. Each Landmolus will start by burrowing out of the ground. Every single time this occurs, it always takes the same amount of time for them to emerge. You can use this to your advantage to try to land powerful arrow strikes to end them efficiently, or sword strikes for a bit more ease but less damage. While this might seem easy, it's much more demanding when you consider that there are 3 of them. Also, your limited arrow stash, the random directions they fly out in, and the 4 rocks that fly out in the shape of an X each time they pop out. Particularly the rocks. It may be effortlessly to dodge them when there is only 1, but it's easy to get tunnel vision on one of them while 3 are active, which might make you ignore where the others are spawning. Even if you monitor them out of the corner of your eye and notice they're far away, there's still a chance the rocks will fly and hit you. This is where getting a feel for their emerge timing becomes key, because if you can get a handle on it, you can down them with arrows quickly. Even when you do take 2 down, the game adds in a final hurdle by having the last Landmolus spawn with 8 rocks flying out like an asterisk. This makes saving a few arrows for the final bit key. It has everything I've been enjoying to this point all packed into one. A clear strategy that gives advantage to knowing the battle, hazards to avoid from range and up close with both being predictable but moderately difficult to deal with, and then the battle does add at least a little bit of randomness in the right spot to keep it fresh with the spawn points never being the same after the intro. Like the Armos Knights, you can manipulate them if you know what you're doing, but the fight is less scripted, making it harder to take advantage of. For that simple but effective bump in satisfying difficulty, they get the edge as the number 3 boss. Number 2, Ganon. You might be surprised to see Ganon outside the number 1 spot. It would be hard to make an argument for ranking him much lower considering the complexity of his design in comparison to his peers. Ganon has 4 phases and a whole range of different attacks that make him on another level of design entirely. At the start, he tosses his trident around, giving you plenty of time to wail on him and dodge. In the second phase, he starts summoning a circle of bats to track and roast you. In the third phase, he'll teleport around and smash the arena as you strike him. He can also summon a single bat that spreads fire in waves if you don't get to him quickly enough. After he slams the outer part of the arena down, you're left to strike him for a stun and then fire silver arrows to do the real damage. Do this 4 times and you secure the victory. All this works incredibly well and is made better by the same thing that Armos Knights and Landmolus did well. It's all about learning mechanics and overcoming them. That said, I do have a few small problems with Ganon. First, I find the need to illuminate the arena annoying. It's a cool throwback to his invisibility in the first game, but there wasn't really a need for it here. It feels like a layer that interrupts the flow of the fight in a way that breaks tension instead of escalating it. I also have to fault the Abyss Plunge. If you fall into it, you have to start the fight all over again. And unlike Moldorm, there are no immediate pickups. You have to go find a fairy fountain among other methods of restoring health and come back, not to mention restoring magic so you can ensure your ability to light the braziers. Finally, I think Ganon's AoE bat in the 3rd and 4th phases is a little bit much. You can mitigate it by attacking quickly, so maybe it's a gameplay device to cue to the player that they need to attack Ganon fast in those phases, but I didn't realize this until many battles in, choosing to play passive out of fear for tanking the bat, so I didn't think it was the best way to go about it. Those complaints don't ruin what's great about Ganon's complexity, and the fight deserves an incredible amount of credit for including diverse phases in an evolving intense battle so early on in gaming history. But there's one boss in A Link to the Past that I think gets a slight edge as the most memorable and best boss in the game. Number 1, Helmasaur King. The true king of A Link to the Past is this hard-headed dino monster. Whereas Ganon has a lot of different phases that change completely, Helmasaur King has 2 phases that are nearly identical but increase in speed and therefore intensity. To start, you'll have to use a dungeon item, the Megaton Hammer, to smash through his facial armor. This takes 16 strikes, which is a tall order considering how much damage the Helmasaur King does at this point in the game to your health bar. He can stomp into you if you're too reckless, smack you with a delayed strike from his tail as he moves at the last second to surprise you, and fire out a fireball that expands into 3 smaller balls popping off in random order. If he lays on fireballs while unleashing his tail strikes, you're in for a world of hurt. While his attacks are chosen in random order as are the fireball explosions, the rest is all scripted. It provides the perfect balance of randomness and environmental danger while allowing for you to manipulate and destroy the boss's health as you learn how to mitigate these challenges. Once you break the face armor, you deal with the same attacks with dramatically increased speed. Instead of the hammer, you need to get in 8 sword slashes to the face to down the beast. It was an amazing challenge to overcome. I love the balance of using the dungeon item in your sword. I found his ranged and melee strikes to hit all the right notes for requiring timely placement for evasion and then finding time to get your own strikes in, and he offers plenty of difficulty that to me is the most gratifying in the game to beat. But how about you? What bosses in A Link to the Past are your favorites and least favorites? Let us know in the comments below. I've been speedrunning A Link to the Past on Twitch recently, so keep your eyes peeled for a coming speedrun tutorial with commentary. We'll be continuing next time with the legendary Ocarina of Time, so be sure to subscribe for that and more rankings from the channel. With that in mind, I know this series has been a little bit more irregular, so consider leaving a like if you enjoyed today's video and want to see more of it. I want to thank you all for watching today. Much love to you, and I'll see you in the next video.